Comedy Store. He watches me in the audience. He comes backstage. He tells me what a great job I did and how much he loves the joke. 2 years later, he's doing that as his last joke on
anything. That's a regret I have. I really shouldn't have said nothing, cause we not in the same league.
And because you finally did it, because you didn't have no other choice, and now that he gone, you gonna act like he wanted to be a movie star. You stop it.
That's kind of like hate and jealousy. And hate and jealousy is a form of grief.
It started with a small moment at the Comedy Store, one of those quiet exchanges that years later turn into full-blown revelations. Katt Williams wasn't just remembering an old joke. He was unearthing something deeper, a wound he'd carried for years. He's talking about the moment he realized Steve Harvey, a man he once respected, had crossed a line only comedians truly understand, taking another man's craft and turning it into his own. That's not just plagiarism to a comic, it's betrayal. Because for Katt, comedy isn't just performance, it's identity. Every punchline is personal, every laugh earned through pain and precision. So when he saw Steve repeat his material, it wasn't flattery, it was theft. And what makes it worse? Katt didn't confront him in anger. He stayed silent until now. In this moment, you can hear the regret in his voice, the way he says, "We not in the same league." That's not ego, that's exhaustion. It's a man realizing he'd spent years respecting someone who only saw him as competition. And that's where this story begins. A story about trust, betrayal, and what happens when two comedy giants find themselves on opposite sides of integrity. But the question is, how did it all come to this?
Just because a person sits on the show and don't hesitate or say or and speaks eloquently, that don't mean it's true.
What Katt says next flips the tone completely. He's no longer just reminiscing, he's exposing something. The mask behind Steve Harvey's image. When Katt says, "You going to act like he wanted to be a movie star," he's not just clowning around, he's pointing to a pattern, the way Steve rewrites the past to protect his brand. Because in Hollywood, image is survival. To most of the world, Steve Harvey is untouchable, a self-made mogul who rose from stand-up clubs to hosting game shows and best-selling books. But Katt doesn't see a legend. He sees someone who let power distort purpose. That line, "Hate and jealousy is a form of grief," says more than it seems. It's Katt's way of calling out what he sees as Steve's hypocrisy. In his eyes, Steve's success isn't built on inspiration. It's built on envy disguised as ambition. And that's the thing about jealousy in Hollywood. It rarely looks like hate. It looks like opportunity, collaboration, friendship, until it doesn't. This isn't just a feud between two comedians. It's a reflection of something bigger. How the industry turns authenticity into competition and brothers into rivals. Because behind the laughter, someone's always losing something.
Supposed to go last is because it was your tour. Tell the truth. It was Steve's tour.
The words "worse than we thought" hit different when they come from Katt Williams, because Katt doesn't speak unless there's something behind it. And in this case, it's not just a feud, it's a philosophy clash. He's saying Steve Harvey isn't just doing comedy wrong, he's living wrong, that he's built his empire on something other than truth. When Katt drops a line like that, it's not for clicks, it's a warning shot. Because in Hollywood, calling someone a fraud isn't about jokes. It's about pulling the curtain back. It's about saying, you might love what he sells, but do you really know who he is? And that's why this moment hit the internet like a storm. Steve Harvey, the family-friendly mogul, the man who preaches faith and hustle, suddenly being painted as something darker. People started asking the questions Katt wanted them to ask. Who is the real Steve Harvey? How much of his story is truth, and how much is strategy? And the more people replayed Katt's clip, the more it started feeling less like gossip and more like testimony. Because if there's one thing Katt's fans know, it's that he doesn't need to lie to make noise. He just needs to speak his truth and let the internet do the rest. But this isn't the first time he's called out a legend, and the last time he did, the entire comedy world froze.
First of all, I ain't really good at social media, so I didn't even know that was out.
That line, "Just because a person sits on the show and speaks eloquently, that don't mean it's true," is vintage Katt Williams. Sharp, observant, laced with quiet fury. It's his way of saying, don't let the suit and the smile fool you. In Hollywood, presentation is manipulation, and Katt knows that better than anyone. See, when Katt talks like this, it's not just about Steve. It's about the culture that rewards the loudest man in the room, not the realist. He's calling out an entire system that values polish over honesty, image over integrity. And when he says he's never afraid to challenge the status quo, he means it. He's gone at networks, producers, entire movements. And somehow he's still standing. That's the thing about Katt Williams. He's not built to play nice. He's built to survive truthfully, even when that truth costs him. And this moment right here is him setting the record straight again. Because behind that calm delivery is a man who's been burned too many times by the smiles that turned into knives. But the more Katt speaks, the more dangerous it gets. Not because he's wrong, but because he's right.
First of all, I ain't really good at social media, so I didn't even know that was out.
That line, just because a person sits on the show and speaks eloquently, that don't mean it's true, is vintage Katt Williams. Sharp, observant, laced with quiet fury. It's his way of saying, don't let the suit and the smile fool you. In Hollywood, presentation is manipulation, and Katt knows that better than anyone. See, when Katt talks like this, it's not just about Steve. It's about the culture that rewards the loudest man in the room, not the realist. He's calling out an entire system that values polish over honesty, image over integrity. And when he says he's never afraid to challenge the status quo, he means it. He's gone at networks, producers, entire movements. And somehow he's still standing. That's the thing about Katt Williams. He's not built to play nice. He's built to survive truthfully, even when that truth costs him. And this moment right here is him setting the record straight again. Because behind that calm delivery is a man who's been burned too many times by the smiles that turned into knives. But the more Katt speaks, the more dangerous it gets. Not because he's wrong, but because he's right.
Say it.
Okay.
And that was rough.
Now we get to the real tension. The history between Katt Williams and Steve Harvey didn't start with this interview. It's been simmering for years. And the line that triggered it all? It was your tour. Tell the truth. That's not a casual jab. That's Katt putting the receipts on the table. Because back in the early 2000s, when Kings of Comedy was dominating stages, a lot of people didn't know the truth about who was really in charge, who was really writing, and who was taking credit. For Katt, this wasn't just about ego. It was about authorship, the integrity of the craft. Because in comedy, the man who closes the show isn't just the funniest. He's the face of the movement, and when Steve started taking that role, it sent a message. He wasn't just another comic. He was the comic, the brand. Katt saw that and never forgot it, especially when whispers started spreading about Steve allegedly lifting jokes from others, including veterans like Mark Curry. To Katt, that was the last straw. The unspoken rule of comedy had been broken. You don't steal another man's voice. And it wasn't just about Steve stealing material. It was about Steve stealing moments, opportunities, spotlight. For Katt, that was personal. Because in his eyes, if Steve could do that to him, he could do it to anyone. And that's when their relationship shifted from respect to resentment.
Like really kiss most of the corners of my when a person sits on the show and don't hesitate or say or and speaks eloquently, that don't mean it's not in the same league, though. We shooting at two different baskets. I shouldn't even have said nothing.
When Katt Williams calls you out, it's never random. It's strategic. He doesn't speak without evidence. He speaks when he's ready to expose. And by the time those accusations about Steve started circulating, Katt already had the narrative in his grip. See, Katt isn't just a comedian. He's a documentarian of betrayal. He watches, remembers, and then waits. So when he finally said, "Tell the truth," it wasn't a punchline. It was a warning. Because what makes Katt dangerous isn't his words, it's his memory. He's the kind of man who'll sit in silence for years, then detonate the truth in one interview. And this time, that truth was aimed squarely at Steve Harvey, a man Katt once respected, now barely recognizes. The media tried to downplay it. They called it jealousy, bitterness, just another comedian feud. But Katt's tone said otherwise. This wasn't about fame, it was about fairness. Because to him, every stolen joke, every silent betrayal, every closed door adds up. And when the math doesn't balance, Katt makes sure everybody sees the equation.
That's how we got started. And it was rough, man, because it was just the three of us. And the first night we did it was a disaster.
When Katt said, "We not in the same league," he wasn't flexing, he was grieving. That's the sound of a man who's tired of fighting ghosts wearing smiles, because beneath every laugh, there's a ledger of loyalty traded, favors forgotten, and names erased. This wasn't comedy beef anymore. It was confession, the kind of truth that comes from decades of being underestimated, blackballed, and misrepresented by the very industry he helped feed. Katt's tone wasn't loud, it was haunted. And that silence after he said it, that was heavier than a punchline, because he wasn't saying Steve was less talented. He was saying Steve chose the system, while Katt chose the truth. Every word out of Katt's mouth was a quiet declaration. I didn't sell out, even when they told me I had to. And that's what separates them. Steve became a brand. Katt stayed a believer. He could have played the game. He could have smiled for the cameras, laughed through the lies. But Katt's not built for pretending. He's built for pain that tells the truth. And that's why, when he speaks, people listen. Not because he's perfect, but because every word sounds like a wound finally healing in public.
With you, Frankie, I didn't know nothing about this concept. When the promoter told me about it in October, I shot it down. Because that ain't how I've ever promoted it with some real monsters, man. I toured with the Kings. You know, I've been on stage with Sid, DL, and Burning Man.
That moment, that stare, said more than any interview ever could. Katt wasn't speaking to Steve anymore. He was speaking to everybody who ever smiled in his face, then stole behind his back. You can feel the exhaustion in his delivery, not just from Steve's actions, but from years of realizing how the game rewards imitation over integrity. It's the unspoken code of survival in entertainment. If you can fake it long enough, you might just make it. But for someone like Katt, that's a betrayal of art itself. He built his name from raw truth, jokes that made people laugh and flinch. So watching a peer, especially one who once praised him, copy that, then call it his own. That's not competition. That's theft wrapped in applause. And that's what's fueling the fire online right now. Clips resurfacing, fans dissecting punchlines, old footage going viral again. People are noticing patterns. And in a world that records everything, history doesn't stay buried for long. The irony? The same system that ignored Katt for years is now echoing his words. Because when he said everybody sees, he meant it literally. This isn't just a beef, it's a reckoning. A moment where the mask slips and audiences start asking who's real and who's rehearsed. And if you've been paying attention, you can tell this isn't the end. This is the part where reputations start cracking and the truth finally leaks through.
Our shows, so I took cash that night. Because I'm going to go across the border to the casinos in Canada, and I'm going to gamble. We in the limo, me and Sid, we going across the thing. Border Patrol say, "Who are you?"
That smile told a whole story, one of closure, not revenge. Katt wasn't chasing apologies anymore. He was done explaining pain to people who profit from pretending not to understand it. See, what makes this moment powerful isn't the shade, it's the stillness. Because when a man finally accepts the betrayal, the silence becomes louder than any response. That's not weakness, that's peace born from war. And in Hollywood, peace is rare currency. Most keep grudges alive for relevance. Katt? He's learned to walk away before the cameras even start rolling. What's crazy is how the internet flipped this clip. Half the fans called it maturity, the other half called it ego. But what they missed was that this wasn't about Steve anymore. It was about integrity. Katt's been warning us for years about fake friends in suits. He told us about the hidden deals, the blacklists, the comedians who trade honesty for exposure. And every time he tells that truth, he pays for it. In silence, in canceled shows, in reputation hits. So when he said, some doors don't need reopening, he was setting a boundary in public. Not because he hates Steve, but because he finally loves himself enough to walk away from that kind of energy. And that's where things really shift. Because in this era, silence isn't weakness anymore, it's strategy. Because in this era, silence isn't weakness anymore, it's strategy. And nobody understands that strategy better than Katt Williams. See, Katt isn't just walking away from drama, he's studying it. He's seen how the industry turns conflict into currency, how controversy becomes a marketing plan. So when he chooses silence, that's not surrender, that's him choosing control. Because Katt knows the moment he opens his mouth, the room shifts, and the internet starts burning. But this time feels different. You can sense it in his tone. There's no rage, no mockery, just exhaustion. It's like watching a man who's been fighting the same war for 20 years finally realize peace doesn't come from winning, it comes from walking away. And yet, that's exactly what makes this whole situation heavier. Because silence might be strategy, but truth never really goes quiet. The thing about Katt Williams is, when he tells a story, there's always a hidden message buried under the laughter. He's not just exposing Steve Harvey, he's exposing a pattern, the type of game that's been playing out in comedy and Hollywood for decades. It's about who gets to tell the truth and who gets punished for it. Every time Katt speaks up, he loses something. Endorsements, shows, friends, reputation. But every time he stays silent, the lies get louder. That's the trap. That's the unspoken rule in the business. Stay quiet and keep your seat, or speak up and lose everything. And that's what separates Katt from the rest. He doesn't care about the seat anymore. He's already seen what happens when you sit too long at a crooked table. So when he called Steve Harvey worse than I thought, it wasn't about jealousy. It was disappointment. The kind that only comes from realizing one of your own heroes might have been part of the machine all along. Because for years, Katt looked up to the kings of comedy. He studied them, he respected them, but then he started to see the politics, the favoritism, the unspoken deals behind closed doors, and that's when the illusion cracked. That's when he realized talent alone doesn't win in Hollywood, power does, and nobody knows how to wield that power like Steve Harvey. To the public, he's the smiling motivational icon, the self-made man preaching hustle and faith. But to people who've been close enough to the fire, it's not that simple. Katt's not calling him evil, he's calling him calculating. Someone who learned early on that success isn't just about who tells the best jokes, it's about who tells the best version of themselves. And that's where Katt's anger really comes from. Not envy, betrayal. Because he's not mad that Steve made it. He's mad at how he made it. How someone could talk about loyalty on TV while stepping over people to get there. How the same man preaching about integrity could be silent when others were blackballed. That's the hypocrisy Katt's been pointing at for years, not just in Steve, but in the whole system. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. You start realizing how many legends were built on borrowed work, how many icons stayed relevant by dimming someone else's light, and how quick Hollywood is to crown a king, as long as that king plays by its rules. Katt doesn't play by those rules. Never did. That's why he keeps getting exiled, then resurrected by the internet. Because the people, the audience, can smell what's real. They might laugh at his jokes, but what keeps them listening is the truth behind them. And that's something no PR campaign can buy. See, Katt's not fighting Steve Harvey anymore. He's fighting what Steve represents. The part of the industry that rewards silence, submission, and selective morality. The system that tells you to smile for the cameras while they rewrite your story behind your back. And maybe that's why his message hits harder now, because he's not just talking about comedy, he's talking about survival. Every comedian who's ever tried to speak truth to power knows what happens next. They get labeled difficult, unstable, angry, then they disappear from the mainstream. But years later, the same people who mocked them start quoting them. That's the cycle. First they laugh at you, then they silence you, then they study you. And Katt knows exactly where he's at in that cycle. He's at the point where his truth is too consistent to ignore. The receipts line up, the stories match, and the same names keep showing up. At some point, you can't call it bitterness. You have to call it experience. The irony, Katt never wanted to expose anyone. He just wanted credit for his craft and fairness in the game. But when the same industry that preaches respect keeps disrespecting the ones who built it, what choice does a man have but to talk? Because silence might protect your brand, but it destroys your soul. And that's where the audience connects with him. They see themselves in Katt's fight, the underdog who's too honest for his own good, the one who refuses to play fake to fit in. He's the living reminder that being real has consequences, but it also has power. That's why his words about Steve Harvey hit the way they do. Not because he's gossiping, but because he's articulating something people already feel. That too many in power preach humility while practicing exploitation. That too many success stories are built on silence. And in a world where everyone's performing, Katt's mistakes feel more human than most people's perfection. That's why people keep coming back to him. Because he doesn't hide the scars. He shows you what surviving the game actually looks like. There's a reason Katt's story keeps resurfacing every few years, like a warning. He's not just part of the culture, he's a reflection of it, a mirror to everything the entertainment world wants to hide, the greed, the manipulation, the double standards. So when he speaks on Steve Harvey, it's not personal anymore, it's symbolic. It's him saying, this is what happens when you trade truth for power. Because behind every handshake, every network deal, every motivational speech, there's a cost. And the people paying that cost usually aren't the ones smiling on camera. But here's the twist. The more they try to bury Katt Williams, the bigger he gets. Because controversy fades, but truth ages well. And whether you love him or hate him, you can't deny, Katt Williams earned his voice the hard way. Through every L, every setback, every cancellation, he came back sharper. And this time, he's not aiming at a person. He's aiming at the whole machine. So when Katt says, Steve Harvey's worse than I thought, it's not just a punchline. It's a wake-up call, a reminder that behind every polished brand is a story of what and who had to be sacrificed. And maybe, just maybe, Katt's not trying to destroy Steve Harvey's image. Maybe he's trying to protect what's left of comedy's soul. Because if the truth doesn't survive in that world, what does? A career? A paycheck? A fake smile? At some point, someone has to say it, and Katt's willing to take the hit so the next generation doesn't have to. And that's why, whether you agree with him or not, you can't look away, because his honesty, messy as it is, reminds us of something real. That fame doesn't make you free. And sometimes, the loudest person in the room is the only one still telling the truth. So maybe Katt Williams isn't bitter. Maybe he's just done pretending. And in a world full of scripted smiles and brand-safe lies, that kind of rawness feels dangerous. But that's also what makes it powerful. Because the truth always sounds like hate to people who built their lives on lies. And that's why Katt keeps talking. Not to tear down, but to remind everyone what integrity costs in a business that sells it cheap. And if there's one thing we've learned about Katt Williams by now, it's this. He may stumble, he may fall, he may even disappear for a while, but he'll always come back swinging. Because the one thing you can't cancel is authenticity. And don't go anywhere. Click the next video you see on your screen for even more juicy celebrity chaos, betrayals, and stories Hollywood doesn't want you to know. See you in the next one.